The smell of rotten eggs and raw sewage was the last thing Izuku Midoriya thought he would ever experience. It was a suffocating, invasive stench that forced its way up his nostrils and down his throat, accompanied by a thick, gelatinous sludge that burned like battery acid. The world around him, the concrete walls of the underpass, the afternoon sunlight filtering through the exit, the discarded soda cans on the ground, muffled and blurred into a watery, distorted painting. "Don't worry," a gurgling, wet voice vibrated against Izuku's eardrums, the sound originating from the very slime that was currently forcing its way into his lungs. "I'm just taking over your body. It'll be easier for both of us if you just stop struggling. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds, then, it'll all be over." Izuku clawed frantically at his own throat, his fingernails scraping against the impermeable surface of the sludge villain. His lungs screamed for oxygen, expanding in his chest with terrifying, agonizing emptiness. His vision began to narrow, the edges of his sight creeping in with a cold, unforgiving blackness. "Is this it?" Izuku thought, the panic giving way to a cold, crushing despair. "Is this how I die? I haven't done anything yet. I haven't even tried to be a hero." The universe, it seemed, was determined to remind Izuku Midoriya of his place. He was quirkless, powerless, a relic of human evolution left behind in a world where 80% of the population could breathe fire, move objects with their minds, or fly through the air. He was a fragile, breakable thing, and now, he was going to die as an afterthought, a mere flesh suit for a two-bit criminal. His eyes rolled back. His arms went limp, and then, the manhole cover blew off its hinges. It didn't just pop off, it erupted upward with the force of a detonating missile, clanging against the ceiling of the underpass before violently crashing back down to the pavement. A massive, towering silhouette blocked out the sunlight at the end of the tunnel. "Have no fear, you're safe." The voice was a booming baritone that seemed to vibrate the very molecules of the air. It was a voice Izuku had heard 1,000 times on his computer screen, a voice that had been the soundtrack to his childhood dreams. "Now that I am here," the sludge villain whipped around, the gelatinous mass trembling. "All Might?" Before the villain could even extend a tendril, the towering titan of muscle and American-themed spandex blurred into motion. It wasn't just speed, it was a displacement of physics. The wind pressure shifted violently, sucking the breath from the tunnel. All Might drew back a fist the size of a cinder block. "Texas!" The fist shot forward. Smash! There was no physical contact. There didn't need to be. The sheer, unadulterated kinetic force of the punch compressed the air into a concussive shockwave that tore through the underpass like a localized hurricane. The wind pressure hit the sludge villain like a freight train, ripping the liquid apart at the molecular level. Izuku was thrown backward, the suffocating slime blasted away from his face in an instant. He hit the pavement hard, gasping desperately for air, his lungs burning as they finally filled with oxygen. As Izuku's vision cleared, he looked up. There, standing amidst the swirling dust and scattered droplets of villainous sludge, was the symbol of peace. His blonde hair stood up in two iconic V-shaped tufts. His shadow was vast, his smile impossibly bright. "Are you all right, young man?" All Might asked, his voice ringing with pure, unwavering confidence. Izuku couldn't speak. His jaw opened and closed like a fish out of water. He was in the presence of a god among men. He scrambled to find his notebook, Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13, and thrust it forward, only to find a massive, sprawling signature already taking up a full 2-page spread. He signed it. He signed it without me even asking. Izuku mentally shrieked, bowing so furiously his spine popped. "Thank you? Thank you? This will be a family heirloom. I'll pass it down for generations. Ah well. Just doing my civic duty." All Might laughed, a boisterous, hearty sound. He had already gathered the unconscious sludge villain into 2 empty soda bottles, securing them in his pockets. "I must be off now. The life of a pro-hero is a busy one, fighting villains and the clock." "Wait." Izuku scrambled to his feet. "Wait, already? I have so many questions. I need to ask you. Pro-heroes are always running out of time." All Might declared, bending his knees. The concrete beneath his boots cracked. "Stay safe, young man." With a sonic boom that shattered the silence of the afternoon, All Might launched himself into the sky. It was only a second later, suspended 1,000 feet in the air, that the symbol of peace felt a strange, dragging weight on his right leg. He looked down, his eyes bugged out of his skull. What the? Izuku Midoriya was clinging to his pant leg for dear life, his face flapping in the gale-force winds, his eyes squeezed shut in pure terror. I need to ask you something, Izuku screamed over the roaring wind. Are you insane? All Might roared back, his heroic composure slipping for a fraction of a second. Let go! If I let go now I'll die. Good point. All Might shouted, scanning the sprawling cityscape of Muzurifu below them. Just close your eyes and hold on. The landing on the rooftop of a nondescript office building was rough, but safe. Izuku collapsed onto the sun-baked tar, trembling uncontrollably, his legs feeling like they had been replaced by wet noodles. That was incredibly reckless, young man. All Might scolded, his voice stern, though a bead of sweat rolled down his chiseled forehead. I'll see that someone knocks on the door to let you down safely. Now I truly must be going. Wait! Izuku pleaded, scrambling to his knees, his knuckles white as he gripped his own trousers. He couldn't let him leave. This was it. This was the only chance he would ever get in his entire, miserable life. He had to know. He had to ask the one man who embodied everything he wanted to be. All Might paused, his back turned to the boy. Even if I don't have a quirk? Izuku shouted, the words tearing out of his throat, raw and desperate. Can someone without a quirk be like you? Can I ever be a hero? Silence fell over the rooftop, save for the distant hum of traffic far below. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the laughter, the pity, or the outright dismissal he had received from doctors, teachers, and his own mother. When he finally dared to open his eyes, the towering figure of All Might was gone. In his place stood a skeletal, emaciated man. His clothes hung off his frail frame like hand-me-downs on a scarecrow. His eyes were sunken, dark shadows cast over hollow cheeks, and a thin trail of blood leaked from his mouth. Izuku let out a blood-curdling scream. You deflated. Where is All Might? Are you an imposter? I am All Might, the skeletal man sighed, wiping the blood from his chin with the back of a bony hand. He sat heavily against the railing of the roof, looking exhausted beyond measure. You know how guys at the pool suck in their gut to look good? I'm like that. Izuku's mind short-circuited. The invincible, untouchable symbol of peace was sitting in front of him, looking like a strong breeze would shatter his ribs. All Might lifted his oversized t-shirt, revealing a horrific, sprawling mass of twisted, purple and black scar tissue that covered the entire left side of his torso. It looked like a crater left by a meteor strike. Izuku gasped, instinctively recoiling. I got this in a big fight 5 years ago, All Might said quietly, his voice lacking the booming resonance it had possessed just moments before. My respiratory system was nearly destroyed, and my stomach was completely removed. I've endured countless surgeries, but I'm fading. Right now, I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day. 5 years ago. Izuku murmured, his encyclopedic knowledge of hero trivia firing off. Was that when you fought Toxic Chainsaw? You know your stuff, All Might chuckled weakly. But no. That punk couldn't have done this to me. This was something else. I asked that this be kept under wraps. The public can't know. The symbol of peace, the one who saves people with a smile, cannot be seen as weak. I smiled to trick the fear inside me. I smiled to show the villains that I am an insurmountable wall. All Might looked at the boy, his sunken blue eyes carrying a weight that Izuku couldn't even begin to comprehend. You asked if you can be a hero without a quirk, All Might said, his voice gentle but firm. Pro-heroes are always risking their lives. It's a dangerous, bloody profession. Some villains cannot be defeated without immense power. So, no. I honestly don't think you can become a hero without a quirk. The words hit Izuku like a physical blow. It wasn't Bakugo's explosive anger, or a teacher's dismissive sigh, or his mother's tearful apologies. It was the absolute, undeniable truth delivered by the ultimate authority on heroism. It was over. The dream was dead. If you want to help people, All Might continued, turning toward the roof access door. Become a police officer. They get mocked for taking the villains heroes bring in, but it's a fine profession. It's not bad to have dreams, young man. Just make sure they're attainable. The heavy metal door clicked shut, leaving Izuku utterly alone on the roof. The descent down the stairs was a blur. The walk through the city streets was a hollow, echoing nightmare. Izuku couldn't hear the bustling crowds, the honking cars, or the chatter of students heading home. He felt entirely empty. The notebook in his hand, the one containing the signature of his idol, felt like a cruel joke. He's right, Izuku thought, staring at his plain, quirkless hands. I've been deluding myself. I should just give it up. His morose thoughts were violently interrupted by a massive, earth-shaking explosion. Izuku looked up. Several blocks away, a column of thick black smoke was rising into the twilight sky. Without thinking, his legs moved. His body, conditioned by years of chasing villain fights and hero debuts, propelled him forward out of pure habit. When he arrived at the scene, the sight made his blood run cold. It was the alleyway in the shopping district. Fires raged, licking up the sides of the buildings, igniting awnings and shattering windows. Pro-heroes, Death Arms, Kamui Woods, Empty Lady, and Backdraft were on the scene, but they were standing back, watching helplessly. In the center of the inferno was the sludge villain. How? Izuku's mind raced. All Might put him in the bottles. Izuku's eyes widened in horror. When I grabbed onto his leg, they must have fallen out. This is my fault. But that wasn't the worst of it. The sludge villain had grown massive, feeding off the panic and the environment, and trapped within its suffocating mass, struggling with ferocious, terrified fury, was a boy with ash-blonde hair, Katsuki Bakugo. Bakugo was firing off massive explosions from his palms, desperately trying to blow the slime away, but his quirk was only feeding the fires around them, creating a hazardous zone that prevented the pro-heroes from getting close. His quirk is too dangerous. Death Arms shouted, shielding his face from a blast of heat. We can't get close without risking the hostage. We have to wait for someone with a suitable quirk. I need 2 lanes to get in. Empty Lady grunted, stuck between 2 buildings. I can't reach them. Izuku watched in horror. Bakugo, the boy who had bullied him for a decade, the boy who had told him to take a swan dive off the roof just hours prior, was drowning. Izuku saw it in his eyes. Beneath the anger, beneath the explosive fury, Bakugo's red eyes met Izuku's in the crowd. It was a look of pure, unadulterated terror. A silent plea for help. Before Izuku's brain could process what was happening, his legs were moving again. But this time, it wasn't a habit. It was a compulsion. He burst through the police barricade, ignoring the shouts of the pro-heroes. He sprinted into the inferno, the heat blistering his skin, the smoke burning his eyes. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have a quirk. He just knew that someone was dying, and no one else was moving. Deku? Bakugo gurgled, shock overriding his panic as the scrawny, quirkless boy charged the towering monster. You idiot! Stop! Death Arms roared. Izuku ripped his yellow backpack off his shoulders and hurled it with all his might. The heavy zipper clipped the sludge villain right in the eye. Gah! The villain reeled back, its grip loosening for a fraction of a second. Bakugo gasped for air. Izuku scrambled into the slime, his bare hands frantically clawing at the viscous liquid, desperately trying to dig Bakugo out. Kaken, what are you doing here? Bakugo yelled, coughing violently. My legs moved on their own. Izuku cried, tears streaming down his face, a mix of terror and absolute clarity. You looked like you needed saving. In the crowd, a skeletal, emaciated man watched the boy claw uselessly at the monster. Tashinori Yagi felt a profound, sickening shame wash over him. I reprimanded him for dreaming, All Might thought, clutching his bleeding side. I told him to be realistic. And yet, he is the only one acting like a hero. I'll kill you! The sludge villain roared, raising a massive, fluid tendril to smash Izuku into a bloody paste. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut. I'm sorry, Mom. Suddenly, a massive, muscular arm gripped the villain's tendril, stopping it dead in its tracks. Blood sprayed from the man's mouth, his skeletal form forcibly inflating with raw, agonizing power. I really am pathetic. All Might roared, his voice returning to its godlike resonance. He ripped the tendril away and grabbed Bakugo by the collar. I told you what makes a champion, yet I didn't live up to it myself. With a terrifying flex of his muscles, All Might pulled his arm back. Detroit. The punch landed square in the center of the sludge villain's mass. Smash! The shockwave didn't just obliterate the villain. The sheer wind pressure generated by the physical strike blew out the fires in the alleyway. It slammed into the clouds above, swirling them into a massive vortex. A second later, rain began to fall from the sky. All Might had punched the air so hard, he changed the weather. Izuku sat on the wet pavement, gasping, staring at the giant hero as the rain washed the soot from his face. The aftermath was a blur of flashing lights and shouting paramedics. Bakugo was praised for his powerful quirk and endurance, surrounded by heroes offering to scout him. Izuku, on the other hand, was violently chewed out by Death Arms and Kamui Woods for his recklessness. He took the scolding silently, his head bowed. He knew they were right. He hadn't accomplished anything. He had just gotten in the way. As the sun began to set, painting the Muzutafu sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Izuku walked home alone, his clothes singed and damp. Deku! Izuku turned. Bakugo was storming down the street toward him, breathing heavily. Kaken? Listen to me, you quirkless nobody! Bakugo barked, pointing a finger directly at Izuku's chest. I didn't need your help. You didn't save me. You're nothing. You hear me? Don't you dare look down on me. I owe you nothing. With that, Bakugo turned on his heel and stomped away, leaving Izuku utterly bewildered. Well, that was expected, I guess, Izuku muttered, turning back toward home. I am here. All Might slid out from a side alley, striking a dramatic pose, blocking Izuku's path. All Might? Izuku shrieked, stumbling backward. How did you get away from the reporters? Ha! Getting away from the press is a piece of cake for a pro. All Might laughed, before violently coughing up a geyser of blood and deflating back into his skeletal form. Izuku scrambled to his side. Are you okay? I'm fine, Toshinori sighed, wiping his mouth. He looked at Izuku, his expression turning deeply serious. Young man. I came here to thank you, and to apologize. If you hadn't been there, if I hadn't heard your story, I would have been nothing but a fake in a muscle suit. You spurred me into action. No! Izuku protested, waving his hands frantically. It was my fault to begin with. I got in your way. I was just a quirkless kid trying to play hero. Exactly, All Might interrupted, his blue eyes piercing Izuku's soul. Of all the people there, the pro-heroes, the police, the bystanders, it was the timid, quirkless boy who moved. You ran into the fire when no one else would. Toshinori stood up straight, regardless of the pain in his side. Top heroes have stories about them from their school days, All Might said softly. Most of their stories have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. Tears pricked the corners of Izuku's eyes. His breath hitched. It was the phrase he had waited his entire life to hear. The words he had begged his mother for. The words he had prayed for every single night. You can become a hero. Izuku fell to his knees, clutching his chest as he sobbed, the dam finally breaking. 10 years of pent-up sorrow, frustration, and pain poured out of him onto the sidewalk. All Might let him cry for a moment before continuing. You are worthy to inherit my power. Izuku sniffled, looking up, snot running down his nose. Inherit your power? What do you mean? You have a quirk, don't you? My quirk is not something I was born with, All Might revealed, looking at his scarred hands. It is a sacred torch, passed on from one person to the next. The power to stockpile energy, to weave the voices of the past into a fist that smashes the future. It is called One for All. And I want you to be its next vessel. Izuku was stunned. A quirk that could be transferred? It defied everything science knew about biology. But looking at the man before him, Izuku didn't doubt it for a second. You've been through a lot, All Might smiled. But you have the heart of a true hero. Will you accept my power? Izuku didn't hesitate. He wiped his tears, stood up, and looked All Might dead in the eye. Yes. I will. Excellent. All Might beamed. However, there is a catch. Izuku blinked. A catch? Before All Might could explain, a loud, shrill ringing erupted from his oversized pants pocket. Tashinori flinched, pulling out a massive, heavy-duty encrypted satellite phone. His face paled. "Excuse me one moment," Tashinori muttered, turning away. "Hello? David? What is it? What? A coalition? On an island? And the American East Coast? Casualties? Good God. Yes. Yes, I understand. I'll be on the next private jet. Have the doctors prepped my life support chamber on the plane?" Tashinori hung up the phone, his skeletal face grim, his hands shaking slightly. He turned back to Izuku. "Young Midoriya, I have some terrible news. An unprecedented international crisis has just broken out across the Pacific. I am needed immediately. I have to leave." "Leave?" Izuku repeated, panic rising in his chest. "For how long?" 10 months, All Might said heavily. "I will not return to Japan until the week of the UA entrance exams. I cannot stay here. If I do, thousands of innocent people overseas will die. But my training. One for all. You said my body would explode if I took it now." Izuku stammered, his mind racing. "It will," All Might said urgently, digging into his pocket and pulling out a crumbled piece of paper and a pen. He slammed the paper against a brick wall and began furiously scribbling. "Your vessel is completely unsuited for my quirk. You are a scrawny, frail boy. You need to build muscle. You need to become a sturdy vessel. Here." All Might thrust the paper into Izuku's hands. It was a hastily drawn map, pointing to a location on the coast of Mizurufu. "Dagoba Municipal Beach Park," All Might commanded. "It is a dumping ground for illegal ocean trash. Your training is to clean the entire beach. Move the refrigerators, the tires, the trucks, lift heavy things. Eat chicken and rice. Do push-ups. Run 10 kilometers every single day. I will return in exactly 10 months, right before the exam. If you clean that beach, you will be ready for one for all." All Might began to inflate, his muscles expanding rapidly, his suit stretching to its limits. "I am sorry to leave you so abruptly, young Midoriya. But a hero must go where the cries for help are the loudest. I believe in you. I will see you in 10 months. Wait. All Might, I don't know how to." With a sonic boom that shattered the nearest street light, All Might blasted into the sky, rocketing toward the airport, leaving Izuku alone on the quiet street, clutching a crumpled piece of paper. Izuku stared at the map. 10 months. All by himself. "I can do this," he told himself, gripping the paper tightly. "He believes in me. I just have to clean a beach." 2 weeks later, Izuku Midoriya was lying face down in the sand of Dagoba Beach, crying. The beach was not a beach. It was a monument to human waste. Towers of rusted metal, rotting appliances, and waterlogged furniture stretched for miles along the coastline. The smell was a rancid mix of salt, rust, and decaying seaweed. Izuku's hands were blistered and bleeding. His muscles screamed in agonizing pain. For 14 days he had come here after school, attempting to move the trash. And in 14 days, he had successfully relocated exactly 3 tires, a broken microwave, and a soggy mattress. He was failing. "Come on!" Izuku sobbed, wrapping his bleeding hands around the edge of a rusted mini-fridge half buried in the sand. He planted his feet. He pulled. His biceps felt like they were tearing apart. The veins in his neck bulged. The fridge didn't budge a single millimeter. Izuku collapsed backward into the sand, staring up at the gray, overcast sky. He was too weak. All Might's plan, the American Dream Plan, as he had hastily scribbled at the top of the paper, was designed for someone who already had a foundation of strength. Izuku was starting from less than zero. He had no athletic background, no trainer to correct his form, no one to spot him or encourage him. He was just a scrawny kid pulling at trash, injuring his own joints in the process. "What are you doing, Deku?" Izuku froze. He recognized that voice. It was the voice that haunted his nightmares. He sat up and looked toward the boardwalk. Standing by the railing, looking down at him with an expression of absolute disgust, was Katsuki Bakugo, flanked by his 2 lackeys. "Kaken," Izuku rasped, clutching his bleeding hands to his chest. I saw you walking this way after school and figured I'd see what the quirkless loser was up to, Bakugo sneered, leaning over the railing. He looked out over the sprawling mountain of garbage. Playing in the trash, huh? Seems fitting. Found a new home among the rejects? The two lackeys laughed cruelly. I'm training, Izuku lied, his voice trembling. Training? Bakugo scoffed, a dark, explosive spark crackling in his palm. For what? You think lifting a broken microwave is going to get you into UA? You think being a garbage man is heroic? You're a pebble, Deku. You're nothing. You've always been nothing, and you'll always be nothing. Give it up before you get yourself killed. Bakugo turned and walked away, his laughter echoing down the boardwalk, fading into the sound of the crashing waves. Izuku sat in the sand for a long time. The cold wind bit through his thin t-shirt, chilling the sweat on his skin. He's right, Izuku thought, the dark, insidious whisper of self-doubt creeping back into his mind. What am I doing? I'm going to destroy my body before All Might even gets back. I can't do this alone. I don't know how to be strong. He needed to get away. He couldn't go home. His mother would see his bloody hands and freak out. He couldn't stay at the beach. The trash was a mocking monument to his weakness. He just needed to go somewhere quiet. Somewhere where there were no heroes, no villains, no classmates, and no expectations. Izuku packed up his backpack and began to walk. He didn't take the train home. Instead, he took the outbound rail, riding it to the very last stop on the edge of the city limits. He found himself at the base of the Mount Unauthorized Nature Preserve. It was a sprawling, dense, and largely unexplored region of primeval forests that bordered the city. It was restricted territory. The government kept it closed off due to the treacherous terrain and rumors of wild, quirk-mutated animals. Heroes rarely patrolled here. There was no glory in the woods, no civilians to save. It was the perfect place to disappear for an afternoon. Izuku hopped the rusted chain-link fence, ignoring the no trespassing signs, and stepped into the tree line. Instantly, the sounds of the city vanished, replaced by the deep, resonant hum of nature. Massive, ancient cedar and oak trees towered hundreds of feet into the air, their thick canopies blocking out the late afternoon sun. The air was cool, smelling heavily of pine needles, damp earth, and moss. Ferns as tall as a man brushed against his legs as he hiked deeper and deeper into the wilderness. For the first time in weeks, Izuku felt his heart rate slow down. The crushing weight of All Might's expectations and Bakugo's cruelty seemed to lift slightly in the quiet isolation of the forest. He walked for over an hour, climbing steep inclines, navigating over massive, moss-covered boulders, until he reached a clearing near a rushing waterfall. He sat on a rock, listening to the water crash into the basin below. I just want to be strong, Izuku whispered to the empty forest, wiping a stray tear from his eye. I want to be able to protect people, but how can I protect anyone when I can't even lift a refrigerator? Krrr crack. The sharp, deafening sound of splintering wood shattered the peace of the forest. Izuku jumped, his heart leaping into his throat. A flock of birds exploded from the canopy above, screeching in terror. Boom! The ground trembled. Dust and leaves shook loose from the branches above. It sounded like an explosion, but it lacked the fiery resonance of Bakugo's quirk. It sounded like pure, concussive force. Izuku crept forward, his heroic instincts overriding his fear. He moved silently through the thick brush, approaching the source of the noise. He peeked through a cluster of ferns and gasped, slapping a hand over his mouth to muffle the sound. In a massive clearing, a man was violently destroying the forest. He was a hulking brute of a man, wearing camouflage pants and a dirty tank top. But what was terrifying was his quirk. His arms were covered in a thick, metallic bark, and his fingers ended in razor-sharp, spinning saw blades made of bone and wood. Come on out, you stupid beasts! The man roared, his voice grating and vicious. He swung his arm, launching a barrage of foot-long wooden spikes that embedded themselves deep into the trunks of the ancient trees, splintering the wood. I know there's a mutated bear out here somewhere. The black market is paying top dollar for quirk pelts. If I have to level this whole damn mountain to find you, I will. A poacher! Izuku realized, his blood running cold. and a villain with a highly destructive emitter/mutant hybrid quirk. He's destroying the ecosystem. Izuku reached for his pocket to call the police, only to realize he had 0 bars of cell service this deep in the mountains. He was completely cut off. The poacher laughed maniacally, revving the saw blades on his hands. He approached a massive, centuries-old oak tree. "Let's see if you're hiding up here." He drove his saws into the trunk. The tree screamed, wood chips flying in all directions as the villain began to cut through the massive base. Izuku panicked. If that tree fell, it would crush the habitat of countless animals. But what could he do? He was quirkless. He was weak. Suddenly, the air in the clearing changed. The birds stopped chirping. The wind died down. A heavy, oppressive aura descended upon the forest, thick and suffocating. It was a primal, terrifying pressure, the kind that triggered the deepest, most ancient fight-or-flight instincts buried in human DNA. The poacher stopped sawing. He looked around, suddenly nervous. "Who's there? A hero? I ain't afraid of you." From the shadows of the canopy, 100 feet up, something moved. Thump. 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 It sounded like a tribal drum, deep and rhythmic, echoing through the trees. But it wasn't a drum. It was the sound of massive, leather-thick palms beating against a barrel-sized chest. Thump, 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 thump. A shadow eclipsed the poacher. Izuku watched in absolute, paralyzed awe as a figure dropped from the canopy. It didn't fall, it plummeted like a meteor. Crash! The figure slammed into the earth with such cataclysmic force that a shockwave of dirt, leaves, and rocks exploded outward, knocking the poacher off his feet and forcing Izuku to duck behind the ferns to avoid the debris. When the dust settled, Izuku dared to look. Standing in the center of the crater, knuckle-walking on 2 massive, tree-trunk-thick arms, was an ape. But it wasn't a normal ape. It was a gargantuan, hypermuscular silverback gorilla, standing easily over 7 feet tall on its knuckles, and likely over 9 feet tall if it stood on its hind legs. Its fur was a rich, dark brown, save for a swooping, stylized tuft of hair on the top of its head. And most bizarre of all, tied neatly around its massive neck, was a bright red necktie emblazoned with the yellow initials DK. "What the hell are you?" The poacher screamed, scrambling to his feet, revving his saw blades. "Some kind of mutant animal? Perfect. Your pelt will make me rich." The ape didn't roar. It didn't screech. It simply stood up on its hind legs, towering over the poacher, and crossed its massive arms over its chest. It looked down at the human with an expression of profound, intellectual disgust. The poacher roared, thrusting his hands forward, firing a barrage of razor-sharp wooden spikes directly at the ape's chest. "He's going to be impaled." Izuku panicked. The ape didn't even flinch. It simply raised one hand and swatted the air. The sheer speed and density of the ape's hand deflected the spikes like they were toothpicks, shattering them into splinters upon impact. The poacher's eyes widened in horror. "What?" The ape grinned, revealing rows of massive, blunt teeth. It dropped to its knuckles and charged. It didn't run like a man, nor did it scamper like an animal. It moved with a terrifying, rhythmic martial grace. It launched itself forward into a high-speed, forward somersault, a literal rolling tackle. The poacher screamed, swinging his saw blades. The rolling ape slammed into the poacher with the force of a speeding dump truck. The sound of breaking bones echoed through the clearing as the villain was launched 30 feet into the air, screaming in agony. The ape uncurled from its roll, planting its feet firmly on the earth. It looked up at the falling villain. Izuku watched, his jaw unhinged, as the ape began to wind up its right arm. It spun its arm in a rapid, vertical circle, building momentum, faster and faster, until the arm was nothing but a blur of brown fur and sheer kinetic energy. The air around the ape's fist seemed to warp and distort from the rotational force. As the villain plummeted back down to earth, the ape unleashed the wound-up punch. Bam! The uppercut caught the poacher square in the chest. A shockwave rippled through the air. The villain's body folded in half around the giant fist, his eyes rolling into the back of his head before he was launched horizontally like a cannonball. He crashed through 3 smaller trees before embedding himself entirely into the solid rock face of a nearby cliff, out cold. Silence returned to the forest, broken only by the sound of falling leaves. Izuku Midoriya forgot how to breathe. He had just witnessed a physical feat that rivaled All Might himself. But there was no quirk involved here. There was no flashy energy, no explosions, no magic. It was pure, unadulterated, primal physical strength, honed to a terrifying martial perfection. The ape cracked its knuckles, let out a satisfied grunt, and turned around to walk away. But as it turned, its sharp, intelligent eyes locked onto the fern bush where Izuku was hiding. The ape froze. Izuku froze. The massive beast slowly approached the bush. Every step it took shook the ground beneath Izuku's feet. The boy was paralyzed with fear. This creature had just utterly destroyed a dangerous villain without breaking a sweat. If it wanted to crush Izuku, it wouldn't even take effort. The ape reached the bush and effortlessly ripped it out of the ground by its roots, tossing it aside, exposing the trembling teenager. Izuku looked up into the eyes of the beast. They weren't the empty, feral eyes of an animal. They were deep, brown, and ancient, filled with a startling, profound intelligence. The ape grunted, a deep, rumbling sound in its chest, and pointed a massive, callous finger at the yellow backpack slung over Izuku's shoulder. "And my bag?" Izuku stammered, his voice cracking. The ape nodded once. Trembling, Izuku unzipped his bag. The ape reached in with surprising dexterity, its massive fingers pinching a small, charred notebook. Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13. The ape pulled the notebook out and held it up to its face. It sniffed the burned cover. Then, with a single fingernail, it delicately flipped open the book. Izuku watched in stunned silence as the giant gorilla read his notes. The ape's eyes scanned the intricate drawings of pro-heroes, the detailed breakdowns of their quirks, the calculations of explosion radiuses, acid viscosity, and telekinetic limits. The ape flipped page after page. Empty Lady. Kamui Woods. Death Arms. Bakugo. Finally, the ape stopped. It looked down at Izuku. Then, it looked back at the book. The gorilla sneered, rolling its eyes dramatically. It let out a loud, wet snort of absolute disdain and tossed the notebook over its shoulder, letting it splash into a muddy puddle. "Hey!" Izuku squeaked, offended despite his terror. "That's my life's work." The ape huffed, planting its knuckles on the ground, leaning its massive face down until it was inches from Izuku's. The smell of bananas and pine needles washed over the boy. The gorilla raised a hand. It pointed to the unconscious villain embedded in the rock. Then, it pointed to the muddy notebook. It shook its head side to side. "Quirks," the gesture seemed to say. "Magic powers. Illusions." Then, the ape stood up. It beat its chest, thump, 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 and flexed its massive, tree-trunk biceps, striking a pose of dominant, overwhelming physical power. It pointed to itself, then pointed directly at Izuku's scrawny chest, and nodded. "Muscle. Bone. Willpower. Real strength." Izuku stared at the ape, his mind racing. This creature, this king of the jungle, lived out here in isolation. It didn't rely on a society of heroes. It didn't rely on a quirk lottery. It had forged its own body into a weapon capable of overpowering the supernatural. "You!" Izuku whispered, his fears slowly being replaced by a burning, desperate awe. "You beat him with just your body." The ape grinned, flashing a thumbs up. The gorilla turned to leave, knuckling its way back toward the deeper woods. Izuku looked down at his own frail, blistered hands. He thought of the beach. He thought of the rusted refrigerator he couldn't move. He thought of All Might, telling him he needed to become a sturdy vessel. He thought of Bakugo, laughing at his weakness. If he went back to the beach alone, he would fail. He would tear his muscles, break his bones, and disappoint the symbol of peace. He needed a teacher. He needed someone who understood raw, physical power better than anyone else on Earth. "Wait!" Izuku screamed, his voice echoing through the clearing. The ape stopped, looking over its massive shoulder. Izuku scrambled to his feet, ignoring the mud on his knees. He ran toward the towering beast and threw himself into a deep, desperate bow, his forehead nearly touching the dirt. "I am weak!" Izuku cried out, tears of frustration and hope springing to his eyes. "I have no quirk. I have no strength. I have a destiny that I am not ready for, and if I try to take it right now, it will destroy me." The ape turned around fully, tilting its head, listening intently. "Society tells me I'm useless without a quirk. Izuku yelled, clenching his fists in the dirt. They tell me I can't be a hero. But you just proved them wrong. You proved that a strong body can beat a strong quirk. Izuku looked up, locking eyes with the king of the jungle. Please! I don't want to move trash. I want to be strong. Teach me. Teach me how to fight. Teach me how to be a beast. The forest fell silent. The wind rustled the leaves. The ape stared down at the crying, desperate boy. It looked at the boy's blistered hands, the singed edges of his uniform, the fire of pure, unadulterated willpower burning in his emerald eyes. The ape didn't see a human. It saw a runt. A scrawny, pathetic member of the troop who was begging to survive in the jungle. Donkey Kong smiled. It was a wide, toothy, terrifying grin. He reached behind his back, into a hollowed-out stump, and pulled out a massive, wooden barrel that weighed at least 200 pounds. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the barrel directly at Izuku. Izuku screamed, throwing his hands up to catch it. The barrel slammed into him, crushing him to the dirt under its immense weight. Izuku groaned, his arms shaking wildly as he struggled to keep the heavy wood from crushing his ribs. Donkey Kong laughed, a booming, rhythmic hooting sound that echoed through the mountains. He patted his red tie, thumped his chest twice, and gestured for the boy to follow him deeper into the wild. Izuku gritted his teeth. His muscles screamed in agony, but a fierce, feral smile broke out across his face. He pushed against the barrel, feeling the rough wood splintering against his palms. The American dream plan was dead. The way of the Kong had begun. The alarm clock on Izuku Midoriya's desk beeped exactly once before a heavily bandaged, blistered hand slammed down on the snooze button. It was 4 a.m. Outside his bedroom window, the city of Muzurifu was pitch black, silent, and dead to the world. Izuku groaned, a pathetic, high-pitched wheeze escaping his lips as he attempted to sit up. Fire, hot, agonizing, unforgiving fire, laced through every single muscle fiber in his body. His core felt like it had been run over by a steamroller. His biceps felt like they were stuffed with ground glass. His legs, usually his strongest asset from years of running away from bullies, trembled so violently he almost collapsed the moment his feet touched the floorboards. He looked down at his hands. They were wrapped in thick white gauze, stained with patches of dried blood and iodine. It had only been 4 weeks since he abandoned the American dream plan and ventured into the restricted mountain ranges to train under the tutelage of a massive, necktie-wearing cryptid. 4 weeks since he had traded the rusty refrigerators of Dagobah Beach for the primal, merciless wilderness. And Izuku was entirely convinced that he was going to die. Izuku, honey? His mother's voice fluttered through the thin walls of the apartment. Izuku froze, wincing as a sharp pain shot up his spine. The door creaked open, and Inko Midoriya peeked in, her green eyes wide with maternal worry. She took in the sight of her son, covered in bandages, shaking like a leaf, and wearing a ragged tracksuit. Izuku, are you sure about this Sunrise Wilderness Fitness Club? Inko fretted, her hands wringing her apron. You come home every night covered in mud and bruises. Yesterday, I found leaves in your hair that I couldn't even identify. And your hands, sweetheart, maybe this is too much. High school entrance exams are stressful enough without you destroying your body. Izuku forced a bright, reassuring smile onto his face, desperately trying to suppress a grimace as his abdominal muscles protested the movement. I am fine, Mom. Really? He chirped, grabbing his yellow backpack. The club president is just really intense. He believes in, natural resistance training. It's perfectly safe. Plus, I'm building great stamina for the Yui written exams. Inko sighed, stepping forward to adjust the collar of his tracksuit. I just worry, Izuku. You've never been the athletic type. And with your condition. She didn't say the word quirkless, but it hung heavily in the air between them. Just promise me you won't push yourself too hard. I promise, Mom, Izuku said, giving her a gentle hug. He felt a pang of guilt for lying to her. If Inko knew that her son's club president was a 9-foot-tall, hyper-intelligent gorilla who communicated through grunts and routinely threw him off cliffs, she would likely have a heart attack. But Izuku couldn't tell her. He couldn't tell anyone. He slipped out of the apartment, the cool morning air biting at his cheeks, and began the agonizing 5-mile trek to the edge of the city limits. By the time Izuku hopped the rusted, restricted chain-link fence at the base of Mount Muzutafu. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows through the ancient cedar trees. The transition from the concrete jungle of the city to the untamed wilderness was instantaneous. The hum of streetlights was replaced by the cacophony of chirping insects and rustling leaves. Izuku navigated the treacherous terrain purely by memory. Over the past month, he had learned every route, every mossy boulder, and every hidden ravine on the path to the ape's domain. As he approached the massive clearing by the waterfall, a deep, rhythmic vibration pulsed through the soles of his red sneakers. Thump, thump, thump. Izuku swallowed hard. He stepped through the thick fern bushes and entered the clearing. Sitting cross-legged on a massive, flat stone in the center of the clearing was Donkey Kong. The giant silverback was meditating, his eyes closed, his massive chest rising and falling in slow, measured breaths. Even completely at rest, the ape emanated an aura of terrifying, dominant power. His muscles were so dense they looked like they were carved from mahogany wood. The red tie around his neck fluttered slightly in the morning breeze. "And Master DK?" Izuku stuttered, bowing deeply. He had taken to calling the ape master on the second day, a title the gorilla had accepted with a smug, toothy grin. DK opened one deep brown eye. He grunted, a sound that vibrated right into Izuku's chest. The ape uncrossed his massive legs, stood up, and stretched, his joints popping with the sound of snapping tree branches. He looked down at his scrawny human pupil. DK poked Izuku in the chest with a finger the size of a baseball bat, sending the boy stumbling backward. DK shook his head, a gesture of profound disappointment. Still too soft, the gesture translated perfectly in Izuku's mind. "I'm trying." Izuku defended himself, rubbing his chest. "Human biology is different. I don't have a mutant quirk to give me fast muscle recovery. I'm operating on pure lactic acid and willpower right now," DK snorted dismissively. He didn't care for human excuses. The ape turned and lumbered toward the sheer rock face at the edge of the clearing, gesturing for Izuku to follow. They arrived at a massive, hollowed-out cavern hidden behind a curtain of thick vines. Izuku knew this place. It was the Horde. DK swept his massive arm outward, revealing a cavern filled to the brim with thousands upon thousands of bananas. It was a golden sea of potassium. DK pointed to a designated pile of bananas, easily weighing 400 pounds, and then pointed toward the summit of the mountain, a treacherous, 3-mile uphill hike over jagged rocks and loose mud. "Move them." Izuku stared at the pile, then at the mountain, then back at the pile. "Master DK, that's impossible. I can barely lift 50 pounds without my arms giving out. How am I supposed to carry 400 pounds of bananas up a mountain?" DK didn't answer with words. He reached into the pile, grabbed a massive bundle of bananas, and casually tossed them at Izuku. Izuku scrambled to catch them, nearly collapsing under the weight. DK crossed his arms and glared. "Start walking. Or I throw you up the mountain instead." Izuku whimpered, adjusting his grip on the heavy bundle. He turned and began the agonizing trek up the mountain path. This was the brutal reality of the Way of the Calm. There were no weights. There were no treadmills. There were no protein shakes or calculated rest days. There was only the jungle, and the sheer, unadulterated necessity of survival. For the first hour, Izuku tried to approach the task analytically. He muttered under his breath, calculating the optimal angle of elevation, the center of gravity of the bananas, and the friction coefficient of the muddy trail. "If I distribute the weight evenly across my trapezius muscles," Izuku mumbled, his face red with exertion, "and keep my center of mass low, taking 30-inch strides to maximize kinetic efficiency." Smack! A half-eaten banana peel slapped Izuku perfectly on the back of his head, breaking his concentration. He stumbled, dropping the bundle of bananas into the mud. Izuku spun around. DK was walking 10 paces behind him, casually peeling another banana. The ape frowned, tapping his own temple, and then aggressively waving his hands in a cut-it-out motion. "Stop thinking." "I can't just stop thinking," Izuku cried out, his frustration boiling over. "I'm quirkless. My brain is the only weapon I have. If I don't calculate my movements, my body is just going to break. I'm not a gorilla, master. I can't just power through everything." DK paused mid-chew. His brown eyes darkened. The goofy, casual demeanor vanished, replaced by the terrifying apex predator Izuku had seen destroy the poacher. The ape dropped to all fours and closed the distance between them in a single, terrifying leap. Izuku fell backward into the mud, throwing his arms over his face, expecting to be crushed. Instead, DK grabbed Izuku by the collar of his tracksuit and hoisted him into the air, bringing them face to face. DK didn't look angry. He looked entirely serious. He pointed a massive finger at Izuku's head. He shook his head. Then, he pointed to Izuku's chest, right over his heart. He nodded. DK dropped the boy back into the mud. The ape knelt down and picked up a heavy, jagged rock from the trail. He held it out to Izuku, gesturing for him to take it. Izuku, trembling, took the rock. DK then pointed to a thick, sturdy tree branch hanging about 15 feet above them. He tapped his temple, mocking Izuku's analytical mutterings, and gestured for Izuku to throw the rock and hit the branch. Okay. Izuku muttered, wiping the mud from his eyes. He analyzed the distance. He estimated the wind speed. He calculated the weight of the rock and the necessary trajectory arc. He wound up his arm and threw it perfectly. The rock sailed through the air, and missed the branch by a full 3 feet, clattering uselessly into the brush. Izuku cursed under his breath. DK grunted, picking up another rock of equal size. But the ape didn't pause. He didn't look at the wind. He didn't mutter a single equation. He just snapped his wrist and threw it. Crack! The rock struck the center of the branch with the force of a bullet, completely shattering the wood. Izuku stared in shock. DK crouched down next to Izuku. He tapped the boy's head again, then mimed a small explosion with his hands, followed by pointing at a bird flying overhead, and then miming a telekinetic lift. Izuku translated the complex gestures instantly. Quirks. DK nodded. He pantomimed humans using quirks, relying on magic, relying on external forces, relying on overcomplicated mechanics to solve simple problems. DK showed a human relying on a fire quirk to cook, a speed quirk to run. Then, DK beat his chest. Thump. 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 He pointed to the muscles in his arms, his legs, his core. The message was clear, delivered without a single spoken word, yet profound in its simplicity. Humans rely on quirks, so they let their bodies grow weak. They overthink because their bodies cannot keep up with their minds. In the jungle, there is no magic. If a predator attacks, you do not have time to calculate the wind speed. You act. Your body must be a weapon that fires before your brain even pulls the trigger. Izuku looked down at his blistered, trembling hands. For his entire life, he had relied on his notebooks. He had studied heroes, analyzed their quirks, and broken down their fighting styles into mathematical equations. He did this because he had no power of his own. He thought his brain could compensate for his body. But out here, against a creature of pure, instinctual might, his notebooks were utterly useless. You want me to stop fighting like a human, Izuku whispered, his eyes wide with realization. You want me to fight like a beast. You want my body and my instincts to be one. DK grinned, giving Izuku a massive thumbs up. The ape pointed back at the pile of dropped bananas in the mud. Feel the weight. Don't calculate it. Own it. Izuku took a deep breath. He closed his eyes. He silenced the endless stream of mumbling equations in his head. He imagined the weight of the bananas not as a mathematical variable, but as an opponent, a physical entity he needed to conquer. He gripped the bundle. He didn't think about his trapezius muscles or his center of mass. He just thought up. With a primal, guttural yell, Izuku hoisted the 400 pounds of bananas onto his back. His legs shook, his knees bowed inward, but he didn't drop them. He locked his jaw, his eyes blazing with a newfound, feral determination. DK hooted in approval, clapping his massive hands together, producing a sound like thunderclaps. Izuku began to march up the mountain. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't mathematically optimal. But it was raw. It was real. Month 1 was about breaking Izuku Midoriya down. Month 2 was about rebuilding him. By the start of the second month, the physical changes in Izuku's body were becoming impossible to ignore, even to himself. The endless, agonizing cycles of tearing muscle fibers and rebuilding them through forced, primal labor were yielding unprecedented results. The scrawny, hollow-chested boy who had cowered in the underpass was gone. In his place stood a teenager whose physique was rapidly transforming. His shoulders broadened, squaring off with a new, dense layer of muscle. His core, subjected to the constant strain of lifting, pulling, and dodging, had tightened into a wall of solid, functional definition. His forearms and biceps were thick and corded, covered in a network of prominent veins, but the most significant change was in his hands. Gone were the soft, unblemished hands of a boy who only held a pencil. Izuku's palms were now wrapped in thick, unyielding calluses. They felt like rough sandpaper, tough enough to grip jagged rocks and coarse bark without tearing. However, raw strength was only half of DK's curriculum. "Master, I don't understand," Izuku shouted over the roaring rapids of a deep river gorge. They were standing on the edge of a cliff. 100 feet below them, violent whitewater rapids crashed against jagged rocks. Suspended across the chasm were a series of thick, wildly swinging vines. DK stood on the opposite cliff, holding a massive, hollowed-out tree trunk like a bongo drum. Izuku was panting heavily, his tracksuit discarded, wearing only a pair of shorts. His muscles were primed, but his nerves were shot. He had attempted to swing across the gorge 3 times already, and 3 times he had lost his grip, plummeting into the icy rapids below, only to be fished out by DK at the last possible second. "I have the grip strength now," Izuku called out, examining his callous hands. "I have the upper body power. But the vines are swinging erratically. Every time I reach for the next one, the wind pushes it away, and my momentum stalls." DK sighed, shaking his head. He placed his massive hands on the hollow log. "You are strong now, Runt. But you are stiff. You move like a stone. A stone sinks in the water." DK began to play. Thump slap. Thump slap. Thump slap thump. It was a strange, hypnotic beat. It wasn't a fast, chaotic drum roll, nor was it a slow, melodic rhythm. It was a tribal, driving pulse. It sounded like a heartbeat. Izuku stared across the gorge. "What is that?" DK kept drumming. He stomped his massive foot in time with the beat. He gestured with his chin toward the swinging vines. Izuku watched the vines. He watched them swing in the wind. Then, he listened to the drums. Thump slap. A vine swung left. Thump slap. A vine swung right. Izuku's eyes widened. The wind, the pendulum motion, they aren't erratic. They're moving to a frequency. A natural rhythm. DK nodded, the beat intensifying. The jungle has a pulse. Everything moves to it. The wind, the water, the predators, the prey. If you fight the pulse, you lose your momentum. If you ride the pulse, you are unstoppable. Izuku closed his eyes. He let the sound of DK's drumming wash over him. He stopped analyzing the distance. He stopped calculating the wind resistance. He listened to the beat. Thump slap. Thump slap. He felt his own heartbeat sync with the drums. He felt the expansion and contraction of his lungs lock into the rhythm. Thump slap. Izuku opened his eyes. They weren't the nervous, analytical eyes of a quirkless nerd. They were sharp, focused, and completely empty of thought. He ran to the edge of the cliff and leaped. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the first thick vine with his right hand. The momentum swung him forward over the terrifying drop. Normally Izuku would have panicked here. He would have held on tightly, waiting for the swing to reach its apex before nervously reaching for the next vine. But that killed momentum. That was fighting the pulse. Instead, Izuku listened to the beat echoing across the gorge. Thump slap. Before the first vine even reached its apex, Izuku let go. He launched himself into the empty air, completely weightless for a terrifying second. He spun his body, letting the kinetic energy carry him, and reached out with his left hand. Grab. His hand clamped onto the second vine just as it swung into his path. The timing was flawless. He didn't lose an ounce of momentum. In fact, he gained speed. DK's drumming grew faster, matching Izuku's accelerating momentum. Thump slap thump slap. Izuku became a blur of motion. He didn't look down at the deadly rocks. He didn't look at his hands. He kept his eyes fixed on the opposite cliff, letting his body move entirely on instinct. He swung, released, spun, and grabbed. It was a fluid, kinetic dance. It was the rhythm of the ape. With a final, massive swing, Izuku launched himself off the last vine, flying through the air, and tucked into a tight roll. He hit the dirt on the opposite cliff, rolling gracefully to disperse the kinetic impact, and popped up onto his feet, perfectly balanced. He had crossed the gorge in less than 10 seconds. Izuku stood there, chest heaving, staring at his hands in absolute disbelief. He hadn't thought about a single movement. He had just felt it. DK stopped drumming. The massive gorilla walked over to Izuku and clamped a heavy hand on the boy's shoulder. The ape looked down, a rare expression of genuine pride crossing his feral features. Master. Izuku breathed, looking up at the giant. What was that? I felt like I couldn't miss. I felt like the momentum was doing all the work for me. DK grinned. He tapped his chest, then tapped Izuku's chest. The conga rhythm. Izuku's analytical mind, which had been suppressed, suddenly flared back to life, but this time, it wasn't working against his body. It was working with it. He scrambled for his yellow backpack, digging out a brand new, pristine notebook. On the cover, instead of hero analysis for the future, he wrote, Kong-style combat, the biomechanics of instinct. I get it now, Izuku muttered rapidly, his pencil flying across the page. Strength is useless without momentum. Momentum is useless without rhythm. Quirks that rely on explosions or energy blasts are static. They fire from a single point. But if a fighter moves with constant, flowing kinetic energy, they can constantly outmaneuver a static quirk user while simultaneously building up rotational force for their own strikes. It's like using the environment as a force multiplier. DK watched the boy scribble furiously. The ape didn't snatch the notebook this time. He realized that the runt wasn't ignoring the lesson. He was translating it into his own language. The boy was adapting. DK let out a booming laugh, swatting Izuku on the back so hard it knocked the boy flat on his face. Good. Now we use the rhythm for combat. The third month of training was a baptism by fire, or rather, a baptism by boulders. The physical conditioning and the mastery of the conga rhythm culminated in DK's signature, most terrifying training exercise. It was a steep, 45-degree incline, heavily wooded, stretching for a grueling half-mile up the side of the mountain. At the very top stood Donkey Kong, a pile of massive, round boulders and heavy wooden logs stacked beside him. At the bottom stood Izuku Midoriya. This is insane! Izuku yelled up the hill, cupping his hands over his mouth. Master, those boulders weigh a ton. If one of those hits me, it's going to crush every bone in my body. DK, standing at the summit, simply pounded his chest and let out a deafening roar. He kicked the first boulder. The massive stone rolled over the edge, picking up terrifying speed as it crashed down the incline, splintering small trees and kicking up a cloud of dust. Izuku's eyes went wide. He's actually trying to kill me. Izuku scrambled up the hill, his boots digging into the loose dirt. He didn't run straight up. He zigzagged, utilizing the conga rhythm to keep his momentum fluid. Thump slap. Thump slap. Izuku internally visualized the beat. He heard the rumble of the boulder approaching. He didn't look at it. He felt the vibration in the earth. Now, Izuku pivoted on his left foot, launching himself to the right just as the boulder tore through the space he had occupied a fraction of a second prior. The wind pressure from the passing stone whipped his messy green hair wildly. I did it! Izuku cheered. He looked up. DK had kicked 3 more boulders, and was currently throwing a massive wooden barrel down the hill for good measure. Gah! Izuku screamed, his survival instincts kicking into maximum overdrive. He didn't run away. He charged forward, straight up the hill. The first 2 boulders were rolling side by side, leaving no room to dodge left or right. Izuku's mind raced. Momentum. Don't stop the momentum. If I can't go around, I go over. He channeled every ounce of his newly forged muscle into his legs. He sprinted toward the approaching boulders, his internal rhythm reaching a fever pitch. At the last possible second, he leaped forward, planting his calloused hands onto the curved surface of the left boulder. He used the boulder's own backward rotational force to propel himself upward, executing a flawless, gymnastic vault over the twin stones. He landed gracefully on the incline, not losing a single step, and kept running. But the wooden barrel was bouncing erratically toward him, unpredictable and fast. Izuku didn't flinch. He dropped his center of gravity, shifting his weight forward. He remembered the poacher. He remembered the sheer, devastating kinetic force of DK's rolling tackle. Izuku dove forward, curling his body into a tight, aerodynamic ball. The Kong roll. He hit the dirt rolling, his dense muscles and calluses protecting him from the rocks. He became a high-speed wheel of kinetic energy. He slammed directly into the bouncing wooden barrel. The impact was explosive. Izuku's rolling momentum, combined with his hardened physique, shattered the heavy barrel into 1,000 splinters upon impact. He blasted through the debris without slowing down, uncurling at the end of the roll to land on his feet, sprinting the final 10 yards to the summit. He reached the top, skidding to a halt right in front of the giant ape. Izuku was covered in dirt, sweat, and sawdust. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving, but his green eyes were glowing with an intense, untamed fire. He stood up straight, his newly broad shoulders pulled back, and looked the 9-foot gorilla dead in the eye. DK stared down at the boy. For a long, tense moment, the ape didn't move. Then, DK raised a massive hand and gently ruffled Izuku's messy green hair. The ape grunted, a soft, approving sound. "You have survived the jungle, Runt." Izuku couldn't help it. A massive, beaming smile broke across his face, and he let out a triumphant cheer, throwing his arms in the air. He had done it. He had taken the most brutal, primitive training imaginable, and he hadn't just survived it, he had mastered it. He was no longer a fragile glass cannon waiting to inherit a power he couldn't handle. He was a weapon all on his own. The changes didn't go unnoticed back in civilization. It was a mundane Tuesday morning at Aldera Junior High. The classroom was buzzing with the usual pre-homeroom chatter. Students were gossiping, showing off minor quirks, and complaining about the upcoming high school entrance exams. Izuku Midoriya sat quietly at his desk in the back, reading through his Kong-style combat notebook. He looked entirely out of place. His middle school uniform, which had hung loosely on his frail frame just 3 months prior, was now stretching at the seams. The black fabric pulled tightly across his broad chest and thick biceps. The collar of his shirt was unbuttoned, revealing the dense cords of muscle in his neck. His posture was no longer hunched and submissive. He sat perfectly straight, his movements slow, deliberate, and coiled with hidden tension. The other students were starting to cast nervous glances in his direction. "Hey, did Midoriya go through a growth spurt or something?" A boy with a stretching quirk whispered to his friend. "I don't know, man," his friend whispered back. "He looks scary. Did you see his hands when he handed in the homework? They look like they're made of rocks." At the front of the classroom, Katsuki Bakugo sat with his feet propped up on his desk. He caught the whispers of the extras around him and sneered, a spark of irritation igniting in his palm. "Deku?" Bakugo scoffed loudly, ensuring the entire class heard him. "He's just padding his uniform to look tough for the UA applications. He's a quirkless loser. A little bit of gym time isn't gonna change the fact that he's a pebble." Bakugo swung his legs off the desk and marched to the back of the classroom. He wanted to re-establish the pecking order. He wanted to remind the nerd of his place. Bakugo slammed his palms down onto Izuku's desk, unleashing a small, sharp explosion that singed the edge of Izuku's notebook. "Hey, Deku," Bakugo growled, leaning in close, his red eyes glaring. "Stop acting like you're hot shit. You're still nothing. You understand me? Don't think for a second you actually have a shot at UA." The classroom fell dead silent. Everyone expected the usual reaction. They expected Izuku to flinch, to stammer, to throw his arms up in defense and apologize profusely. Izuku didn't flinch. He slowly looked up from his notebook. His green eyes locked onto Bakugo's red ones. There was no fear in Izuku's gaze. There was no anxiety. There was only a calm, absolute stillness. The stillness of an apex predator assessing a noisy bird. For the last 3 months, Izuku had stared down a 9-foot-tall, super-powered gorilla who could punch through solid rock and shatter trees with a flick of his wrist. He had dodged boulders that could flatten a car. He had swung over rapids that would have drowned him in seconds. Compared to the primal, overwhelming terror of the jungle. Katsuki Bakugo's firecrackers felt incredibly insignificant. Izuku didn't say a word. He didn't blink. He just stared at Bakugo, his breathing steady, perfectly in tune with his internal conga rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. An oppressive, heavy aura seemed to bleed off Izuku's body. It wasn't a quirk. It was the sheer, visceral weight of someone who had forged their body in the crucible of absolute survival. Bakugo felt it. A cold shiver ran down his spine, completely unbidden. His primal instincts, buried deep beneath his explosive arrogance, screamed at him. Danger! Bakugo's breath hitched. For a fraction of a second, he didn't see the scrawny nerd he had bullied for a decade. He saw a wall of unyielding, muscular force. He saw eyes that calculated the exact kinetic energy needed to shatter his jaw. Without realizing he was doing it, Bakugo took a step back, pulling his hands off the desk. The entire class gasped collectively. Katsuki Bakugo had just backed down from Izuku Midoriya. Bakugo's face instantly flushed crimson with rage and embarrassment. He opened his mouth to shout, to blast the nerd into oblivion to save face, but the homeroom door slid open, and the teacher walked in. All right, settle down, everyone. The teacher droned, carrying a stack of papers. Take your seats. Bakugo, sit down. Bakugo glared at Izuku, his fists trembling with barely contained fury. This isn't over, you damn nerd, he hissed venomously before turning and stalking back to his desk. Izuku watched him go, completely unbothered. He calmly brushed the ash off his desk, picked up his pencil with his heavily calloused fingers, and went back to his notes. The way of the Kong was working. Izuku could feel it in his bones. He didn't have a quirk yet, but for the first time in his life, he wasn't weak. He was powerful, and as he looked out the window toward the distant, hazy peaks of Mount Muzurifu, he couldn't help but smile. Month 4 was about to begin. And he knew DK was just getting started. The transition from spring to the sweltering, oppressive heat of a Japanese summer did nothing to slow the relentless, punishing rhythm of the jungle. If anything, the humidity only made the mountain wilder, thicker, and more unforgiving. Izuku Midoriya, however, was no longer a victim of the wilderness. He was becoming a part of it. It was the beginning of month 4. The boy standing in the center of the clearing was a stark contrast to the crying, frail teenager who had begged a giant ape for tutelage. Izuku was shirtless, his skin baked to a healthy, golden tan by the sun, his torso slick with sweat. His muscles were no longer just visible. They were deeply carved, dense, and functional. His chest was broad, his abdominals cut like a washboard, and his shoulders capped with thick, coiled strength. He breathed in slowly, the heavy, humid air filling his expanded lungs. He closed his eyes, centering himself. Thump, thump, thump. The conga rhythm pulsed steadily in his mind, dictating the flow of blood through his veins. 10 yards away, Donkey Kong cracked his massive knuckles. The sound was like a volley of pistol shots echoing through the trees. The 800-pound silverback gorilla flashed a toothy, challenging grin, his red tie flapping lazily against his barrel chest. DK beat his chest twice and dropped into a low, wide grappling stance. He extended a massive, leathery hand, gesturing with 2 fingers for Izuku to bring it on. Izuku opened his eyes. They were sharp, focused, and completely devoid of fear. He dropped his center of gravity, planting his callous bare feet firmly into the dirt. With a burst of speed that kicked up a cloud of dust, Izuku charged. He didn't run like a normal human. He moved with a low, predatory sprint, utilizing the momentum techniques he had drilled into his nervous system over the past 90 days. He closed the 10-yard gap in less than a second, stepping inside DK's immense reach. Izuku planted his front foot, twisted his hips, and drove his right palm squarely into the center of DK's massive chest, simultaneously sweeping his left leg behind the ape's ankle for a judo throw. He threw every single ounce of his newly forged, rock-solid muscle into the maneuver. Bam! The impact sounded like a baseball bat striking a heavy leather bag. Donkey Kong didn't even blink. The giant ape stood rooted to the earth, entirely unmovable. Izuku strained, the veins in his neck and forehead bulging, his bare feet sliding backward in the dirt as he tried desperately to topple the gorilla. It was like trying to push over a mountain. DK looked down at the struggling boy. The ape let out an amused huff, blowing a puff of air that ruffled Izuku's green hair. Then, with casual, terrifying ease, DK simply flexed his chest. The kinetic rebound launched Izuku backward. Before the boy could even register he was airborne, DK's massive hand shot out, grabbing Izuku by the ankle. The ape casually hoisted Izuku upside down, dangling the teenager like a ragdoll. Okay. I yield. Izuku gasped, the blood rushing to his head. DK chuckled, a deep, rumbling hoo-hoo-hoo, and gently dropped Izuku onto his back in the soft dirt. Izuku groaned, sitting up and rubbing his neck. I don't get it, he muttered, frustration seeping into his voice. I'm stronger than I've ever been. I can lift the boulders. I can carry the bananas. I've maximized my muscle density. But when I hit you, all my kinetic energy just disperses. It's like punching a solid wall of iron. DK sat down cross-legged, the earth trembling slightly beneath his weight. He picked up a thick stick and began to draw in the dirt. He drew a large circle. He pointed to himself. Mass. Then, he drew a small circle. He pointed to Izuku. Lack of mass. DK held up his hands, explaining through fluid, expressive charades. He patted his massive, tree-trunk thighs, then gestured to Izuku's, which, while muscular, were still those of a 15-year-old human. The lesson was simple. Biology had limits. Izuku possessed an incredible work ethic. He had forged a body capable of handling immense strain. But he was human. He would never weigh 800 pounds. He would never possess the sheer, unadulterated mass required to overpower giant opponents through static force alone. If Izuku tried to go toe-to-toe in a stationary wrestling match with a massive villain, or a towering robot, he would lose. Physics dictated it. Force equals mass times acceleration, Izuku mumbled, his analytical brain engaging seamlessly with DK's feral wisdom. He crawled over to the dirt drawings. You have the mass variable maxed out. Even if your acceleration is 0, your mass alone creates a wall. I have a low mass variable. Izuku drew an arrow next to his small circle. So, to generate the same amount of force, my acceleration variable has to be incredibly high. I have to move faster. I have to hit harder. DK nodded, tapping the arrow. But then, the ape shook his head, holding his hand up like a wall and violently smashing his other fist against it, pantomiming the fist breaking. If you just move fast and hit something solid, you will break your own bones. Right, Izuku sighed, staring at his calloused knuckles. Newton's third law. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. If I run at top speed and punch a guy made of steel, my arm shatters. So how do I deliver massive kinetic energy without absorbing the recoil? DK grinned. He threw the stick away. The giant gorilla stood up. He walked to the edge of the clearing, where a massive, rotting oak tree stump sat half buried in the ground. The stump was easily 5 feet in diameter, stubbornly anchored by thick roots. DK didn't wind up a punch. He didn't brace himself. Instead, he dropped to all fours and launched himself forward. Mid-leap, the ape tucked his massive head, rounded his spine, and pulled his knees to his chest. He became a high-speed, 800-pound wheel of furry, muscular destruction. The Kong roll. DK slammed into the stump. But he didn't just strike it, he rolled through it. The centrifugal force and rotational momentum acted like a buzzsaw. The stump exploded into a shower of splinters and dirt, completely obliterated. DK uncurled smoothly on the other side, popping up onto his feet without losing a single fraction of his speed. Izuku's jaw dropped. DK walked back, patting his rounded shoulder and his thick forearms. He then spun his finger in a circle. Izuku's eyes widened with realization. A wheel! He exclaimed, pulling a fresh notebook from his bag. A wheel doesn't absorb the impact at a single static point. As it strikes the target, the rotational momentum disperses the recoil along the entire surface area of the curve. The kinetic energy doesn't travel back up into your joints. It just fuels the rotation. It's an infinitely recycling momentum engine. DK gave a massive thumbs up, striking a pose. You want me to master the Kong roll, Izuku said, staring at the crater where the stump used to be. Not just as an evasive maneuver, but as an offensive weapon. If I can turn my entire body into a high-speed projectile, my lack of mass won't matter. The rotational acceleration will multiply my force exponentially. DK nodded eagerly. He pointed down a long, winding, heavily wooded path that descended the mountain, littered with rocks, logs, and thick brush. He pointed to Izuku. Then to the path. Then he spun his finger again. Roll. The next 2 months were dedicated entirely to the art of the roll. And it was, without a doubt, the most nauseating, bruising, agonizing period of Izuku's life. Translating an ape's natural rolling ability to human biomechanics was incredibly difficult. A gorilla's spine naturally sloped, and their arms were longer than their legs, making a tucked roll aerodynamically efficient. A human's proportions were all wrong. During the first week, Izuku looked less like a devastating kinetic weapon and more like a clumsy armadillo falling down a flight of stairs. Gah! Izuku yelped as he tumbled out of a roll, slamming his ribcage into a mossy rock. He sprawled out in the dirt, the world spinning violently around him. His vision swam with double images of trees and sky. And Master DK, the centrifugal force. It's scrambling my inner ear. I can't see straight. DK, sitting comfortably on a low branch, tossed a banana peel at Izuku's head. Get up. I need to adjust the axis, Izuku groaned, forcing himself upright, waiting for the nausea to pass. If I tuck my chin entirely to my chest, I blind myself. But if I keep my head up, my neck absorbs the impact. He analyzed his own posture, feeling the dense muscle he had built. He realized that to survive the impact, he had to use his forearms and the thickest parts of his deltoid muscles as the treads of the tire. Izuku dropped back into a crouch. He synced his breathing to the internal rhythm. Thumb slap. Thumb slap. Don't look with your eyes, Izuku whispered to himself, remembering the lesson of the swinging vines. Feel the path. Let the momentum steer. He kicked off, diving forward. He tucked his right shoulder, rounding his back, pulling his knees up tight. He hit the ground. The hardened calluses on his forearms and the dense muscle of his back absorbed the impact, transferring it smoothly into forward motion. Whoosh! He completed 1 rotation. Then 2. Then 3. He was rolling. Fast. It's working! Izuku shouted mid-spin, the forest blurring into a smear of green and brown, but a large, fallen log lay across the path ahead. Ah! Izuku broke his concentration, trying to uncurl and break. It was a massive mistake. The sudden shift in gravity caused his momentum to derail. He bounced off the ground, flew through the air, and crashed face first into the mud, sliding a full 10 feet before coming to a humiliating halt beneath the log. DK dropped from the tree, landing with a heavy thud next to Izuku. The ape shook his head. He tapped his own chest, mimicking a steady heartbeat. Then he dramatically flailed his arms, mimicking Izuku's panic. You broke the rhythm. You let fear stop the wheel. I saw the log. Izuku spat mud out of his mouth. I couldn't roll through that. It's too thick, DK grunted. He stepped back, dropped to his knuckles, and launched himself into a Kong roll. The 800-pound ape barreled toward the log. But he didn't crash into it. A split second before impact, while still in a full spherical tuck, DK violently extended his core muscles. The sudden shift in mass acted like a compressed spring. The rolling ape bounced. DK vaulted entirely over the log while maintaining his spin, landing smoothly on the other side and continuing his roll into the distance. Izuku's eyes lit up. A jump! You can jump while rolling! The sheer tactical applications flooded Izuku's mind. It wasn't just a ground attack. If he could compress and release his core while spinning, he could change his trajectory mid-air. He could bounce off walls. He could ricochet off enemies. He could turn his body into a pinball of devastating kinetic energy. I understand, Izuku said, his determination reigniting. He stood up, wiping the mud from his face, and walked back to the starting line. Again. For the rest of month 4, and entirely through month 5, Izuku rolled. He rolled down hills. He rolled up inclines. He rolled over rocks. His forearms and shoulders developed a thick, leathery toughness, resistant to scrapes and bruises. His core strength skyrocketed, allowing him to compress his body tighter, increasing his rotational speed. He learned to manage the dizziness by fixing his internal focus, treating the blurring world outside not as an obstacle, but as a continuous, flowing stream of momentum. By the end of the 5th month, he wasn't just rolling. He was weaponizing it. The waterfall trial. That's what Izuku called it in his head. It was a muggy morning in late August, exactly 5 months into his 10-month regimen. Izuku stood at the bottom of the mountain's largest waterfall. A massive curtain of roaring white water cascaded down a treacherous, 70-degree slope of jagged, moss-covered rocks. The basin at the bottom churned violently. At the very top of the falls, standing nearly 80 feet above, was Donkey Kong. Stacked beside the ape was a towering pile of heavy, reinforced wooden barrels. DK had spent the morning raiding a nearby abandoned brewery, carrying dozens of barrels up the mountain for this exact purpose. DK looked down at his pupil. He let out a deafening, booming roar that overpowered the sound of the waterfall. He hoisted a barrel over his head. "Show me the wheel, runt." DK threw the barrel. It didn't just fall, it bounced violently against the jagged rocks, gaining terrifying, erratic speed as it plummeted toward Izuku. Izuku didn't flinch. The fear that used to paralyze him was completely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating, predatory calm. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. Thump slap. Thump slap. Thump slap. His heart locked into the conga rhythm. Izuku sprinted forward, charging directly at the rushing waterfall and the falling barrel. As the heavy wood closed the distance, threatening to crush his skull, Izuku dropped and dove. He executed a flawless, high-speed Kong roll. He became a blur of green and muscle. He slammed into the barrel head-on. The hardened muscles of his back and the violent centrifugal force of his spin acted like a hammer. The barrel instantly shattered into kindling, exploding outward in a shower of wood and water. Izuku didn't slow down. He used the momentum of the strike to carry him forward, his bare feet hitting the slippery, vertical rock face of the waterfall. He couldn't run up the water, but he could use his momentum. He uncurled from the roll, leaping off the rock face just as a second barrel, hurled by DK, came crashing down. Izuku didn't dodge it. He let the barrel fall beneath him, and as he descended from his leap, he planted his feet squarely on top of the falling barrel. For a microsecond, he used the downward force of the barrel as a platform, kicking off it to launch himself higher up the waterfall. He's throwing them in a pattern. Izuku's mind raced, his eyes tracking the giant ape above. It's not random. It's a rhythm. DK grabbed 2 barrels at once, throwing them in rapid succession. Izuku hit the cliff face, bounding off the mossy rocks. He dove into another Kong roll, ricocheting off the cliff, launching himself sideways into the air. He smashed through the first barrel mid-flight, his spinning body obliterating the wood. He uncurled, reached out, and grabbed the edge of the second barrel with his bare hands. He used his immense upper body strength to swing his entire body weight around the barrel, using it as a pivot point to launch himself another 20 feet into the air. He was flying up the waterfall, a relentless, kinetic force of nature. Thump slap! Thump slap! DK grinned fiercely. The ape picked up the largest barrel, a massive, iron-banded keg, and hurled it straight down with devastating force. Izuku was mid-air, 50 feet up, with nowhere to dodge. The keg was coming right at him. Don't avoid it, his instincts roared. Conquer it. Izuku tucked his chin. He pulled his knees to his chest. He tightened his core until his abdominal muscles felt like tempered steel. He spun faster than he ever had before, the air whistling around his rotating form. He met the iron-banded keg in midair. Crash! The impact was deafening. For a second, gravity seemed to freeze. Then, the iron band snapped. The thick oak shattered. Izuku's rolling momentum completely overpowered the density of the barrel. He burst through the center of the keg, carrying his upward trajectory all the way to the summit. He landed on the grassy ledge at the top of the waterfall, uncurling and sliding to a halt on his feet, his breath steaming in the cool mist of the water. Splinters of wood rained down around him like confetti. Izuku stood up straight, his chest heaving. He looked at DK. The giant ape stood there, his arms crossed, an expression of absolute, undeniable respect on his feral face. DK pounded his chest twice and gave Izuku a sharp, definitive nod. Izuku smiled, a fierce, confident grin that mirrored his master's. I'm not a stone anymore, master. I'm a wheel. The euphoria of his physical mastery lasted for exactly 3 days. It was the first week of month 6. Izuku was resting in his bedroom on a rare Sunday off. His body was a patchwork of fading bruises and new, dense muscle. He was lying on his bed, tossing a baseball in the air, catching it with effortless, terrifying grip strength. He felt invincible. He felt ready. His eyes wandered over his desk. Past his limited edition All Might action figures. Past his newly filled notebooks on Kong-style combat. His gaze landed on a crumpled, slightly yellowed piece of paper taped to his corkboard. It was the map. The map to Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. I will return in exactly 10 months, right before the exam. If you clean that beach, you will be ready for one for all. All Might's booming voice echoed in Izuku's memory, suddenly cutting through his confidence like a knife. Izuku sat up slowly, the baseball dropping into his palm. He walked over to the corkboard and stared at the map. The bold letters, American Dream Plan, mocked him. He had abandoned it. He had convinced himself that DK's training was better, and physically, it undoubtedly was. DK had turned him into a superhuman without a quirk. But All Might had trusted him. The symbol of peace, the man Izuku idolized above all others, had given him a task to prove his worthiness to inherit the greatest power in the world. And Izuku had completely ignored it. I've been so focused on getting strong, Izuku whispered, guilt washing over him in a cold wave. I forgot why I wanted to be strong in the first place. A hero doesn't just build muscle. A hero cleans up the mess. A hero does the hard, unglamorous work. He looked at his calendar. It was exactly 4.5 months until the UA entrance exam. If he went back to the beach now, it would be impossible to clean it manually in that time frame. The piles of trash were monumental. Even with his new strength, moving thousands of tons of rusted metal piece by piece would take a year, minimum. Izuku looked down at his heavily calloused hands. He closed his fists, feeling the terrifying, coiled power resting beneath his skin. He thought of the boulders. He thought of the waterfall. He thought of the Kong roll. Piece by piece would take a year, Izuku muttered, a dangerous, feral spark igniting in his green eyes. But I don't fight like a human anymore. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed a dark green hoodie, pulled it over his muscular frame, and slipped out of his apartment window. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park was silent under the light of the full moon. The ocean waves crashed gently against the shore, a soothing rhythm that contrasted sharply with the jagged, horrific skyline of rusted refrigerators, crushed cars, and waterlogged furniture. Izuku stood at the top of the concrete stairs, looking out over the sea of garbage. The smell of rust and decaying seaweed hit him, but it didn't nauseate him like it had 6 months ago. Now, it just smelled like an opponent. He walked down the stairs, his boots crunching on the sand. He approached a massive, rusted pickup truck that was half buried in the dune. 6 months ago, he couldn't even budge a mini-fridge. Izuku cracked his neck. He stepped up to the truck. He didn't calculate his lifting posture. He didn't worry about tearing a muscle. He just sank his fingers into the rusted undercarriage. His grip strength, honed by catching sheer cliffs and swinging on vines, pierced right through the metal like wet cardboard. He breathed in. Thumb slap. Izuku hoisted the truck. With a groan of twisting metal, the 3-ton vehicle was ripped from the sand. Izuku lifted it over his head, his arms locking out, his back perfectly straight. He held it there for a moment, testing the weight. It was heavy, but it wasn't a boulder. Designated dumping zone is the municipal truck bed on the pier, Izuku noted, eyeing the massive dumpster located 50 yards away down the beach. Normally, a strong man would slowly, painfully walk the truck over. Izuku wasn't a strong man. He was a Kong. Izuku twisted his hips, winding his torso up like a spring. He used his entire body's momentum, spun on his heel, and threw the truck. The vehicle soared through the night air, crashing perfectly into the center of the municipal dumpster with a deafening crash, crushing the trash beneath it flat. Izuku grinned. He pulled his hood up, casting his face in shadow. All right, he whispered to the empty beach. Let's clean up. What happened next was a display of physical destruction that defied human logic. Izuku moved through the trash mountain like a hurricane. He didn't carry things, he launched them. He grabbed waterlogged sofas and hurled them like frisbees. He stacked 3 refrigerators on top of each other, wrapped his arms around the bottom one, and threw the entire stack into the dump zone. But throwing was too slow. Izuku encountered a massive wall of rusted washing machines and iron scaffolding that blocked the path to the shoreline. He backed up 20 yards. He dropped his center of gravity. Thump slap. Thump slap. Thump slap. Izuku sprinted. He dove into the sand, curling his body tight. He initiated the Kong roll. He tore across the beach, his spinning body kicking up a massive rooster tail of sand. He slammed into the wall of washing machines. The impact sounded like a bomb going off. The rusted metal didn't stand a chance against the continuous, grinding kinetic force of his roll. Machines were shattered into shrapnel, sent flying in all directions. Iron scaffolding bent and snapped under his weight. He rolled through the trash, obliterating the obstacle entirely, clearing a 10-foot-wide path straight to the ocean in less than 3 seconds. He popped out of the roll, grabbing a flying washing machine midair by the door, spinning like a hammer thrower, and launching it 80 yards directly into the dumpster. For the next 8 hours, Dagobah Beach was a war zone. Anyone walking by the seawall that night would have thought a rogue villain with an explosive telekinesis quirk was destroying the area. Piles of trash exploded outward. Cars were tossed through the air like toys. The ground trembled with the rhythmic impact of a human cannonball tearing through mountains of iron and steel. Izuku didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The rhythm had taken over. The repetitive motion of lifting, throwing, spinning, and rolling became a trance. He was applying every single lesson DK had beaten into him. He used the bounce from a shattered car to launch himself to the top of a trash pile, ground-pounding a mountain of tires to compress them, then rolling them in a massive ball into the dump zone. When the sun finally began to rise, painting the horizon in hues of pink and gold, Izuku stopped. He stood waist-deep in the ocean water, letting the cool waves wash the dirt, rust, and sweat from his body. He was exhausted, his muscles burning with a familiar, satisfying ache. His hoodie was torn to shreds, revealing his heavily scarred, muscular torso. He waded out of the water and walked back up to the concrete stairs. He turned around to survey his work. The entire northern half of Dagobah Municipal Beach Park was empty. It wasn't just clean, the sand was leveled, flattened by the sheer force of his rolling impacts. Where a mountain of garbage had stood for 10 years, there was now a pristine, unobstructed view of the ocean. In a single night, relying entirely on his forged body and primal momentum, Izuku had accomplished what all might thought would take him 5 months. Izuku pulled down his hood. A gentle morning breeze ruffled his messy green hair. He looked at his hands, the thick calluses stained with rust and sand. "I didn't abandon your plan, All Might," Izuku whispered to the wind. "I just outgrew it." The next morning, back in the mountain clearing, DK was waiting. The ape noticed Izuku walking up the path. He noticed the dark circles under the boy's eyes, the fresh scrapes on his arms from the rusted metal, and the unmistakable smell of the ocean clinging to his skin. DK tilted his head, sniffing the air. He looked at Izuku questioningly. Izuku dropped his backpack. He didn't look tired. He looked invigorated. "I had to take care of some homework, Master," Izuku said, cracking his knuckles. "A side project. I'm going to be going there 2 nights a week to finish the job. But don't worry, it won't interfere with our training," DK grunted, crossing his massive arms. He walked up to Izuku and poked the boy's solid chest. "You are pushing your limits, Runt." "I know," Izuku smiled, his eyes blazing. "But you taught me that limits are just a lack of momentum. As long as I keep moving, I won't break." DK stared at the boy. The fragile, overthinking, quirkless kid was completely gone. Standing before him was a predator. A beast wearing human skin. DK threw his head back and let out a booming, triumphant laugh that shook the leaves from the trees. He pounded his chest in a rapid, frenzied rhythm. Thump 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 thump. He pointed to Izuku, then pointed to his own massive, tree-trunk arm, specifically his fist. Izuku's analytical mind caught the gesture instantly. "The roll maximizes my body's momentum," Izuku deduced. "But it's a full-body attack. It lacks targeted, concentrated destruction." DK nodded. He wound his arm in a rapid, vertical circle, building up terrifying kinetic energy. The air around his fist began to warp. Izuku gasped. He recognized the stance. It was the move DK had used to obliterate the poacher on the very first day. DK punched the air. The resulting shockwave parted the clouds above them. The ape looked at Izuku and grinned. Months 1 to 3 built the weapon. Months 4 to 6 built the momentum. Months 7 to 9 will build the trigger. The giant punch, Izuku whispered in awe. He bowed deeply to his master, his blood pumping with pure adrenaline. The beach was half clean. His body was an indestructible wheel. And now, he was going to learn how to throw a punch that could shatter the world. Teach me, master,